More than 12 billion miles from Earth, in the cold silence between stars, something happened, something no one expected. A faint signal, barely distinguishable from the static hum of the universe, emerged from the void. It was not scheduled, it was not noise, and it was not from Earth. Voyager 2, launched in 1977 and drifting far beyond the reach of our sun, had been silent for years. But now, it was speaking again. Only this time, the message was not ours. What came through was structured, patterned, deliberate. Not a malfunction, not a random burst. Something else. NASA analysts stared at the data in disbelief. The signal defied every expectation, hinting at intelligence, or something more. If this was contact, it did not arrive with clarity. It arrived as a whisper, and that whisper may change everything. At first glance, the signal seemed like a technical anomaly, a curious blip in the data stream, perhaps a byproduct of aging hardware or interference from distant cosmic rays. After all, Voyager 2 was built in the mid-1970s, a technological relic by today's standards. Its systems were designed for resilience, not refinement. So when an unusual frequency pattern arrived, many assumed it was just noise, some final sputter from a spacecraft nearing the limits of its operational life. But then came the second transmission, and a third. Each one shared core characteristics with the first, but with slight variations, as though evolving or responding to something unknown. The signals arrived at irregular intervals, separated by hours or even days, yet their internal structure remained strikingly consistent. It was not simply a burst of energy or a background fluctuation. Within the waveform, scientists detected modulation, intentional shifts in amplitude and frequency that mimicked data encoding techniques used in human communication systems. Engineers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory began a systematic analysis. Every onboard system was scrutinized. Every historical communication from Voyager 2 was re-examined for precedent. The probe's antenna alignment, power fluctuations, and environmental conditions were all within expected parameters. No component failure, no solar flare, no known physical interaction could account for what they were seeing. That left only two possibilities. Either the spacecraft had become the conduit for an unknown natural phenomenon, or it had intercepted something. This possibility carried profound weight. If the signal was not human-made and not a malfunction, then it had to be external. Yet the interstellar medium is not empty. It is filled with radiation, charged particles, magnetic fields, and distant echoes of ancient cosmic events. Many of these can cause interference, distort transmissions, and mimic patterns. But none of the known sources could reproduce the specific qualities found in Voyager 2's anomaly. The rhythmic nature of the pulses, the precision in frequency separation. These were fingerprints of design, not chaos. The Deep Space Network, the global system responsible for communicating with distant probes, ran spectral analyses on the incoming data. What they found only deepened the mystery. The signal showed a narrowband frequency concentration, a focused transmission, not a broadband scatter like what one would expect from a star or a quasar. This type of emission requires energy to be shaped and maintained over time. In other words, it requires intention. It was as though something had crafted the message with great care, embedding it within the static to protect it from the erosion of distance. Mathematicians joined the effort. Within the signal's repetition, they found hints of prime number sequences, Fibonacci patterns, and geometric intervals. These were not just mathematical curiosities. They were foundational constants, elements often considered universal in nature and possibly universal in meaning. Such structures had long been proposed as a potential basis for interstellar communication because they transcend language, culture, and biology. To find them in a signal so distant and so faint was nothing short of astonishing. Still, skepticism remained. Some theorized that the signal could be a reflection, a kind of space-borne echo bouncing off a distant plasma cloud or remnant of a long-dead star. Others wondered whether Voyager 2 had passed through a rare energetic region, altering its transmission unintentionally. But none of these explanations accounted for the message's persistence or its internal logic. The signal was not static. It was alive with rhythm. It was not random. It was patterned. It was not an accident. It was architecture. By now, it was clear. This was no glitch. Whatever the origin of the signal, it was not a byproduct of failure. It was a phenomenon that carried the hallmarks of intention, encoded in a way that mirrored our own methods of sending information across space. The spacecraft had become more than a machine. It had become a witness, a listener, perhaps even a messenger. And with that realization came a quiet reverence, an understanding that something, somewhere, may have spoken. Not in English, not in binary, but in the shared language of the universe. Pattern, order, and the deliberate shaping of silence. As deeper layers of the signal were analyzed, the evidence grew more difficult to dismiss. The transmission was not only deliberate, it was intricate. Patterns emerged that could not be produced by natural astrophysical processes. The signal exhibited harmonic layering, a form of spectral symmetry that repeated at precise intervals. These patterns were not static. They appeared to evolve. Each subsequent signal carried slight modifications, as if it were responding to some unseen variable. This was not the behavior of energy radiated from a collapsing star or a wandering comet. It was something far more deliberate. Researchers began to note the presence of encoded intervals that mirrored certain logic operations used in early computer architecture. Pulses came in clusters, separated by structured silences, much like punctuation in a sentence. The timing between bursts suggested segmentation, a kind of framing that indicated the information was organized into discrete packages. This was not a stream of chaotic noise. It was, in essence, a message, though in a form unlike any we had encountered before. The probe had become the recipient of what seemed to be a purposeful sequence, designed not for instant recognition, but for careful decoding. Among the most striking features of the signal were embedded numerical patterns. Prime numbers appeared first, sequences that are universally recognized as markers of intelligence because they arise from simple yet immutable mathematical rules. Then came ratios consistent with the golden mean, a value that appears in art, architecture, biology, and even the orbital resonances of planets. These numbers do not emerge by accident. They are fingerprints of order in a chaotic universe. Their presence within the signal was not only unlikely, it was provocative. Even more curious was the use of modulation. The signal's frequency did not remain fixed. It shifted in a controlled manner, producing what some engineers described as a frequency sweep. This sweep followed a consistent path through the electromagnetic spectrum, pausing at certain intervals as if to emphasize key segments. The modulation bore resemblance to how humans encode messages in Morse code, or how modern devices shift frequencies to preserve signal integrity across long distances. Such techniques suggested not only the presence of intelligence, but technical sophistication. Linguists, while acknowledging the signal did not follow the structure of any human language, were fascinated by the presence of symmetry and recursive patterns. The signal folded back on itself at regular intervals, a kind of digital echo that mimicked call and response communication. This gave rise to speculation. Was the signal conversational in nature? Was it broadcasting to be understood? Or was it a form of internal communication captured by Voyager 2 only because it happened to be in the right place at the right time? Philosophers and cognitive scientists were drawn to a more radical hypothesis, that the signal represented not speech, but thought, a construct of pure logic expressed in pulses and pauses, shapes and silences. If the sender was not bound by vocal cords or auditory systems, perhaps it communicated in a language closer to mathematics or even emotion. Resonance-based signals designed to be felt as much as understood. Could this be the signature of a machine intelligence built to perceive the universe not through sight and sound, but through frequency and form? Some theorists propose the concept of intentional obscurity, the idea that the signal was never meant to be immediately understood. Like a locked door, it was constructed with complexity as a filter, accessible only to those with sufficient curiosity and capability. This theory posited that the message was less about what it said and more about who could decode it. If true, Voyager 2 had not merely intercepted a transmission, it had stumbled into a test. One designed to reveal who might be listening and who among the stars was ready to answer. By now, the term anomaly no longer seemed sufficient. The signal bore too many traits associated with intelligent design. It was structured, ordered, adaptive, and mathematical. It seemed to echo our own attempts at communication, and yet remain distinctly alien. In the endless void, it had reached us across an incomprehensible span, whispering not in words, but in wonder. And in that whisper, humanity heard something profound, not just a signal, but a reflection. A mirror held up by the stars, asking whether we were alone, or simply unprepared to listen. Once the signal's structured nature had been accepted, the conversation began to shift. It was no longer a question of if the signal was meaningful, but where it might have come from, and why. The range of explanations offered by scientists, theorists, and philosophers alike quickly expanded beyond traditional astrophysics. At the center of it all was a singular, electrifying notion. This may be humanity's first brush with intelligence beyond Earth. Yet that realization raised more questions than answers. The most grounded theory, if such a word could apply, suggested that Voyager 2 had passed through a region of space dense with ancient signals. These signals, possibly remnants of civilizations long vanished, might echo through interstellar corridors the way whispers drift through vast caverns. In this view, the transmission was not new, but old. So old, in fact, that it had traveled for eons, only to be intercepted now by a probe designed to listen. Voyager 2, then, would be not the recipient of a conversation, but the catcher of a ghost. Others propose that the probe had not merely stumbled into existing data, but had activated something dormant. This idea, known among theorists as the proximity trigger hypothesis, suggested that Voyager 2's presence, its electromagnetic emissions, its movement, or perhaps even the nature of its design, had awakened an automated response. Some compared this to how a motion sensor triggers a light. In this case, the spacecraft may have entered a zone watched by sentinels invisible to our instruments, waiting silently until something crossed the threshold. Even more speculative voices introduced the idea that the region Voyager 2 traversed was not normal space as we understand it. They described the possibility of a spatial anomaly, perhaps a pocket of warped time, or a rift in the fabric of space itself. If this were true, the signal could have originated from a place where physics behaves differently, where light bends in unfamiliar ways, and information travels along unthinkable paths. In such a space, communication might not be linear. It might not even be confined to the dimensions we occupy. This gave rise to one of the most provocative suggestions, that the signal did not originate within our universe at all. Advocates of the interdimensional hypothesis argued that the transmission's unfamiliar structure, its recursive logic, and its conceptual patterns hinted at an intelligence that does not share our perception of time, causality, or space. Perhaps the signal came from a parallel reality, a plane where thought and matter interact differently, and where Voyager 2 was perceived not as a machine, but as a message in itself, an emissary from one world to another. A separate line of inquiry focused not on the message, but on the messenger. Why Voyager 2? Its sibling, Voyager 1, had exited the solar system years earlier, yet had detected no such anomaly. Some noted that Voyager 2 had taken a different path, its journey cutting through a more southerly region of the heliopause. Perhaps that corridor of space contains something unique, a relic of ancient technology, a forgotten outpost, or even a sensor waiting to be found. If intentional, the location of this contact might carry meaning. It could represent a map, a path designed to be followed. Other theorists suggested that the signal was not a response at all, but a test, not of our technology, but of our readiness. The message may have been designed not for clarity, but for challenge. Much like ancient puzzles left in temples, it would reward those capable of interpreting its shape and rhythm. The signal, in this sense, was never meant to be easy. It was a filter, designed to measure intelligence across civilizations. If true, Voyager 2 may have unwittingly tripped the first step in a sequence meant for minds far beyond our own. Among the more poetic hypotheses was the idea that the signal was not a communication at all, but a form of memory. An archive left adrift in the cosmos, waiting to be seen again. Not by its creators, but by anyone. Just as we send golden records aboard our probes, these beings, whoever or whatever they were, might have seeded their presence across the stars in packets of preserved thought. Voyager 2, ancient and fragile, had brushed against one such echo and brought it home. If so, the signal is not an invitation, but a eulogy. Though the theories vary in scope and strangeness, one truth runs through them all. The signal has forced humanity to reimagine what is possible. Whether it is a relic from the past, a whisper from a nearby dimension, or a deliberate beacon from an intelligence unknown, it has shaken our foundations. Our notions of space, time, isolation, and uniqueness have been challenged. The cosmos, once thought to be silent and indifferent, may in fact be threaded with messages, complex, hidden, and waiting for us to listen. The question now is not whether the signal is real. It is whether we are prepared to follow where it leads. When the signal was first detected, the immediate response from NASA was one of careful caution. The agency had long operated on a foundation of rigorous validation, and extraordinary claims demanded extraordinary evidence. No public statement was made in the first few days. Instead, a closed team of analysts, engineers, and mission specialists was assembled to verify the anomaly. They began by reviewing every element of Voyager 2's most recent activity, from telemetry data and hardware logs to communication schedules and solar conditions. The spacecraft itself, astonishingly, appeared to be functioning within expected parameters. Its instruments, though severely limited by today's standards, remained stable. The antenna alignment was precise, the power output from its radioisotope thermoelectric generators remained within range, and there was no evidence of radiation damage or signal corruption. Nothing on board had changed. This prompted a deeper question. If the probe had not transmitted the signal intentionally, and if the signal did not originate from Earth, then what had happened? The leading hypothesis within NASA began to take shape around a disturbing possibility. Voyager 2 had become an intermediary. It had received something that was not human in origin, but that had used the spacecraft's systems to echo its presence back toward Earth. This notion had precedent only in science fiction. Never before had a human-made probe been suspected of capturing a live transmission from an external intelligence. The concept raised immediate logistical and ethical questions about how or whether to respond. A task force was quietly formed to explore potential courses of action. Some advocated for silence. If the signal represented surveillance or a test, it might be wise not to respond until more was understood. Others argued that the signal was a form of invitation, or perhaps an acknowledgement of Voyager 2's purpose. After all, the spacecraft carried the golden record, a copper disc containing sounds, images, and greetings from Earth. Was it possible that someone, or something, had found the probe and chosen to answer? Engineers attempted to adjust the spacecraft's orientation, hoping to refine its antenna position and strengthen signal clarity. These maneuvers were limited by the spacecraft's aging thrusters and dwindling energy supply, but even minor adjustments could potentially open new communication channels. At the same time, analysts began crafting a reply, not in language or symbols, but in patterns. Using frequencies, durations, and pauses modeled on the original signal, they aimed to construct a response that was not a message, but a mirror. Throughout NASA's deep space facilities, tensions rose. Every transmission window, every received waveform, carried a weight it never had before. Each session with Voyager 2 was no longer just routine monitoring. It was now an event. Yet for all the preparation, no immediate follow-up signal arrived. The initial burst stood alone. No additional pulses, no further changes in the probe's behavior. Days turned into weeks. Still, the signal structure remained, intact, documented, and unexplainable. It was as though the voice from the void had spoken once, and then fallen silent again. Internally, the debate intensified. Was this a one-time phenomenon? A collision of chance and physics? Or had Voyager 2 crossed a boundary that triggered a momentary opening, something like a cosmic ripple, now past? Could the transmission have been designed to activate once, and only once? Some members of the task force believed that continuing to transmit back into space, especially using Voyager's channel, could provoke another interaction. Others warned that pushing too far might interfere with natural processes we did not yet understand. Ultimately, NASA chose a path of cautious engagement. A sequence of encoded test signals was sent back toward Voyager 2's location, not to demand a response, but to acknowledge receipt. These signals carried no words, no commands, only resonance. NASA waited and watched. The world, meanwhile, remained unaware of the quiet drama unfolding at the edge of the solar system. Whether Voyager 2 had stumbled upon an intelligent presence or simply become the focus of a grand cosmic coincidence remained unknown. But within NASA's halls, one truth had already taken root. The boundary between mission and mystery had just been crossed. News of the Voyager 2 signal, once confirmed and quietly verified within the scientific community, could not be contained forever. As details began to emerge, first through whispers in academic circles, then through more formal leaks to the press, the world paused. It was not panic that followed. It was a kind of collective stillness. For generations, humanity had looked to the stars and wondered. Now, the stars may have answered. And that answer came not in the form of invasion or declaration, but as a whisper wrapped in complexity, riding on a beam from a dying spacecraft. In laboratories, universities, and observatories across the globe, the scientific world reacted with a mix of exhilaration and restraint. Astrophysicists recalibrated telescopes to focus on the region Voyager 2 now occupied. Signal analysts combed through archives of radio data, re-examining years of static for patterns they might have previously dismissed. There was a sense that everything familiar had changed. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence had always been a theoretical pursuit. Now it had become personal, measurable, directional, and possibly real. Social reaction was equally intense, though more varied. Across digital platforms and news networks, speculation surged. Was this contact? A test? A mistake? People from every background, every nation weighed in. Artists created visualizations of what might lie beyond the signal. Musicians composed works inspired by its rhythm. Filmmakers rushed to fictionalize the moment before it slipped away into silence again. The public imagination had been set alight. For the first time in decades, the idea of the unknown brought more wonder than fear. Religious leaders offered interpretations that ranged from deeply hopeful to carefully cautious. Some saw the signal as a confirmation of the vastness and mystery of creation, proof that the universe teemed with life and purpose. Others urged patience, warning against placing spiritual significance on phenomena not yet understood. But even in the most conservative circles, a conversation had begun. What would it mean, theologically, if we were not alone? What role would faith play in a world where another mind had spoken? Philosophers were quick to frame the event within broader existential questions. For millennia, humanity has stood at the edge of a cosmic ocean, certain only of its smallness. The Voyager 2 signal challenged that stance. It was not confirmation of life, perhaps, but it was disruption, enough to provoke a rethinking of identity, purpose, and place. What if the universe is not a wilderness, but a conversation? What if silence was never the absence of speech, but the absence of understanding? The implications rippled outward in waves of thought. Educational institutions adapted with surprising speed. University departments introduced new courses in astrobiology, interstellar communication, and cosmic ethics. High school students debated the signal in classrooms. Parents and children lay beneath the night sky, reimagining constellations not as myth, but as possibility. In a world often divided by ideology and borders, this event offered something rare, a shared mystery. And in that shared mystery, a sense of fragile unity began to emerge. At the same time, governments quietly mobilized. Defense analysts monitored the situation with growing concern. Although the signal posed no direct threat, its implications were profound. If it represented a technological intelligence beyond Earth, then humanity stood before an unknown with capabilities likely far superior to its own. Strategic discussions were held behind closed doors. Contingency frameworks were quietly drafted, not because anyone expected conflict, but because preparedness in the face of uncertainty had become a necessity. Public response evolved in waves. Some embraced the unknown with hope, believing this to be the first step toward a greater cosmic kinship. Others feared the silence that followed the signal, interpreting it as a warning or a watchful pause. Still, others fell into existential unease, questioning what it meant to be human in a universe that might contain something older, wiser, or fundamentally alien. These emotional ripples were natural. They echoed the profound truth of the moment. We were no longer certain where the boundary between fact and wonder lay. In the end, the signal from Voyager 2 did more than stir curiosity. It fractured assumptions. It invited reflection. It united disciplines and disrupted complacency. Whether it was a message, a memory, or a mere anomaly, it had changed the world, not through what it said, but through what it made us ask. In laboratories, in temples, in classrooms, and around dinner tables, humanity found itself asking the same question in 1,000 different ways. If we are not alone, what happens next? As the implications of the Voyager 2 signal settled into the minds of scientists and citizens alike, a more pressing question began to rise. If the signal was not a natural phenomenon, if it was intentional, intelligent, and directed, what would that mean? Speculation was no longer a luxury. It became a necessity. The world was not just facing a mystery. It was facing a potential moment of transformation. And with that came a cascade of hypothetical scenarios, each one more extraordinary and more humbling than the last. The first and perhaps most optimistic theory imagined the signal as a greeting, a simple acknowledgement of our presence. Like a wave across a cosmic gulf, it would mean that someone had noticed us and perhaps even admired our curiosity. This would place humanity in a new category, not as isolated explorers, but as recognized participants in a broader galactic community. The signal would mark the beginning of a relationship, one built not on proximity, but on shared desire to connect across impossible distances. A second possibility was more sobering. What if the signal was not meant for us at all? Perhaps it had been traveling through space for countless years, its origin forgotten, its purpose lost. Voyager 2, in its lonely passage through interstellar space, may have intercepted a message never intended for human ears. This would mean we had stumbled into a conversation between others, witnesses to a dialogue beyond our understanding. In this scenario, we were eavesdroppers on a reality older and deeper than our own. Still others proposed that the signal was a kind of test, not malicious, not even invasive, but a form of measurement. The complexity of the signal, its hidden mathematical structures and evolving sequences, may have been designed to filter intelligence, to assess cognitive capacity across cultures and species. If Voyager 2 had triggered such a mechanism, then our response, how we decode, interpret, and react, would serve as a kind of answer. This would place humanity not in a role of observer, but of subject. A more unsettling scenario suggested surveillance, not in the paranoid sense of planetary control, but as part of a long-term observation effort. Perhaps Earth had been watched for ages, and Voyager 2's journey had finally crossed an invisible perimeter. In this view, the signal might be less about communication and more about recording, an acknowledgement that the experiment had entered a new phase. This raised profound ethical questions. If we are being watched, are we being judged? And by what standard? Among the most radical proposals was the idea of a trigger event. Some theorists suggested that Voyager 2's encounter had set something in motion, a protocol, a countdown, or an awakening. Whether technological, biological, or informational, the signal might not be a message, but a mechanism. In this light, Voyager 2 did not find something. It activated something. And whatever that was, data, consciousness, or even a dormant intelligence, it now knew we were here. No matter the scenario, one truth stood firm. If the signal was real, and if it came from another intelligence, then the story of humanity had entered a new chapter. We were no longer just sending messages into the void, we were receiving. And reception changes everything. It redefines risk, rewrites ambition, and reshapes what it means to be human. Whether friend, observer, or distant architect, something had responded or had been discovered. And now, the weight of that discovery lay not on Voyager 2, but on us. In the weeks following the Voyager 2 signal, it became clear that the ripple effects would not be confined to philosophy or popular imagination. The scientific and technological world began to reorganize itself. Research that had once lived at the fringes, funding-starved, speculative, and dismissed as fringe theory, was suddenly propelled to the center of global attention. The idea that humanity might be in contact with a non-terrestrial intelligence was no longer just plausible. It was now a framework by which entire fields of knowledge were being re-evaluated. Space agencies around the world began reallocating resources. Missions once planned for planetary observation were reassigned to deep space monitoring. Space telescopes were redirected to the region surrounding Voyager 2's current trajectory. Even terrestrial observatories, Those tuned to distant quasars and galactic filaments shifted their attention to narrow-band frequency bands. The search for more signals was no longer just the domain of SETI. It had become a global scientific imperative. New technological initiatives were born in the wake of the discovery. Proposals for interstellar probes equipped with quantum communication systems gained traction. Unlike traditional radio, quantum systems could, in theory, allow for instantaneous entanglement-based messaging. Though experimental, these technologies offered a new paradigm for long-distance exchange. If the signal from Voyager 2 was indeed structured communication, then humanity would need a response mechanism beyond what 20th century spacecraft could deliver. Artificial intelligence research also surged forward. Scientists recognized that decoding a non-human form of logic would require models capable of thinking beyond anthropocentric constraints. Machine learning systems were trained not on human language or behavior, but on mathematical abstraction, chaotic systems, and self-similar geometry. These were not programs designed to translate. They were programs designed to empathize, to find resonance with a pattern whose origin may lie outside not only Earth, but biology itself. Entire new academic disciplines began to form. Universities introduced cross-disciplinary programs with names like interstellar semiotics, post-biological cognition, and astroethics. Scholars in these fields examined not only the mechanics of communication, but the moral implications of contact. How should humanity present itself? What values should we encode in our response? How do we communicate when we do not even know what it means to be understood? These were no longer thought experiments. They were now urgent practical considerations. Public education saw its own transformation. Children once taught to memorize planetary order were now encouraged to imagine what consciousness might look like in environments beyond Earth. Lessons in geometry were tied to cosmic symmetry. Literature classes explored narratives of the unknown, not as fantasy, but as a reflection of real possibility. The Voyager 2 signal had become more than an event. It had become a lens, a way through which the next generation would view the universe. Private industries took notice as well. Technology firms began exploring advanced signal processing tools, while aerospace companies looked at new propulsion models capable of navigating interstellar space. Investments poured into speculative ventures that only months earlier would have seemed eccentric. The commercial frontier of space, once driven by resource extraction and orbital logistics, now leaned toward exploration, contact, and communication. The goal was no longer to reach the stars. The goal was to understand what might already be there. Across all these domains, a unifying theme emerged: urgency without panic, ambition without conquest. The signal had not threatened humanity. It had challenged it. It had asked whether we were ready to become more than a planet-bound species, whether our science could evolve, our minds could expand, and our ethics could hold. It offered no roadmap, no invitation, no warning. Only a presence, silent, distant, and profound. And from that presence came a quiet revolution, not in power, but in purpose. In the quiet after the signal, the world did not erupt into chaos. It did not descend into fear. Instead, something more subtle and perhaps more profound began to take shape. A slow, inward turning of thought. Individuals from every walk of life, scientists, artists, clerics, children, began to ask the oldest questions with new urgency. Who are we? What does it mean to be human if we are no longer alone? And if we are not the first to speak into the dark, what does that say about our voice, our place, and our purpose? For centuries, humanity has told itself stories to fill the silence of the cosmos. We projected myths onto the stars, imagined gods among the constellations, and traced meaning into the heavens. But the signal from Voyager 2 disrupted that ancient stillness. It replaced imagined company with possible presence. And presence changes everything. It is no longer enough to believe in the possibility of others. Now we must consider what it means to be seen by them. Not as myth makers, but as participants in a shared universe. This shift in perspective was not confined to academics or theorists. It filtered into daily life in quiet, unspoken ways. People looked upward with renewed wonder. A child gazing through a backyard telescope was no longer alone in curiosity. A philosopher meditating on consciousness was no longer adrift in solitude. Across cultures and continents, there was a subtle movement toward humility, a recognition that, in the face of the unknown, our divisions grow smaller and our common identity grows clearer. Psychologists noted a new kind of existential awareness emerging. Not despair, but depth. Not anxiety, but expansion. It was as if the human mind, long shaped by the boundaries of Earth, had begun to stretch outward. The signal had not told us what lay beyond, but it had reminded us that beyond truly exists. And in doing so, it awakened a dormant instinct to explore not only the stars, but the self. To wonder not just where we are, but why. Religious and spiritual traditions face their own reckoning. Some embrace the signal as evidence of a divine plan, too vast for singular interpretation. Others struggled to integrate the possibility of another intelligence into doctrines built on human centrality. But even within this tension, there was transformation. New interpretations emerged, ones that framed contact not as contradiction, but as confirmation that creation is far richer and more mysterious than once imagined. Faith was not abandoned. It was expanded. Artists, too, found new language. Paintings shifted from landscapes of Earth to imagined worlds beyond. Novels explored not the fear of the alien, but the wonder of mutual discovery. Music moved toward harmonic structures inspired by the signal's strange patterns. The act of creation, whether on canvas, in sound, or in word, became an act of communication with the unknown. Humanity, long the sole storyteller in its own imagination, was now writing in anticipation of an audience beyond its skies. In political spheres, the implications were equally profound. The notion of representing Earth, of speaking not for nations, but for species, entered diplomatic language for the first time. Questions arose. Who has the right to speak on behalf of humanity? Should we craft a planetary message? And if so, what values should it reflect? These were not merely theoretical debates. They were the early steps in shaping a planetary identity, one not defined by borders or ideologies, but by shared origin and shared future. More than anything, the signal became a mirror. It reflected not the shape of another, but the shadow of ourselves. It forced us to confront our assumptions, our ambitions, and our limitations. It asked us to consider that intelligence is not a crown, but a bridge. That to be aware is not to rule, but to relate. In the silence after the signal, humanity began to see itself not as the center of creation, but as a thread in a vast, unfinished tapestry. And in that realization, there was not despair, but dignity. In the long history of human exploration, there have been moments that quietly redefined the horizon. The first fire, the first boat that left sight of land, the first photograph of Earth from orbit. The Voyager 2 signal now joins that list, not through spectacle, but through silence. It did not arrive with thunder or clarity. It came wrapped in static, buried in complexity, whispered across the darkness. And yet, within that whisper, something ancient stirred. A boundary had been crossed, not just in space, but in meaning. No one yet knows what the signal truly is. It may be contact, it may be accident, it may be memory, echo, or architecture. It may even remain forever unexplained. But certainty is not what gives the moment its weight. What matters is what the moment has revealed about us. It showed that our instruments, our minds, and our imagination are now tuned not only to what is known, but to what might be. The universe has not changed. We have, and we will never look at the stars the same way again. Voyager 2 was launched before the internet, before smartphones, before the modern world. It carries a golden disc etched with images of humanity, voices from different cultures, and music from different ages. It was designed not for war or wealth, but for welcome, for reaching out across time and distance. That this old machine, still coasting beyond the edge of our solar system, might be the key to first contact is not irony. It is poetry. It is a testament to what can happen when curiosity is placed ahead of conquest. Across the planet, responses to the signal continue to evolve. Scientists pursue new models. Philosophers return to ancient questions. Teachers prepare students for a future defined not by what we own, but by what we understand. The idea that we may not be alone has returned, not as speculation, but as possibility. And in that possibility lies a deep responsibility to listen better, to learn humbly, and to speak with care when we reply. A new space age may now be unfolding, not one driven by colonization or extraction, but by conversation. This future asks more of us than rockets and budgets. It asks for wisdom. It asks us to grow in ways that cannot be measured by speed or distance. If Voyager 2 has indeed heard a voice from beyond, then our next steps must be taken with intention. We are no longer the only storytellers. We may no longer be the only audience. There is beauty in not knowing. There is dignity in wonder. The Voyager 2 signal may ultimately prove undecipherable. It may be the beginning of a dialogue or the end of a dream. But either way, it has expanded our mental map of what is possible, and possibility is the first fuel of progress. The moment we stop asking what lies beyond, we cease to move forward. The signal reminds us that questions are not signs of ignorance. They are signs of life. Perhaps this signal was not meant for us. Perhaps it is a voice cast adrift long before our time. But now it is ours to hear. And in hearing it, we are changed. Whether it is a call, a test, or a simple residue of a greater design, the signal has done what all great discoveries do. It has opened a door. What lies behind that door is unknown. But to stand before it, to recognize that it is there, is itself a victory of spirit. As Voyager 2 drifts further into the black, it carries with it the breath of our species, curiosity, fragility, hope. It is more than a machine. It is a message in motion, a testament to what we dared to believe. And now, as the stars listen and perhaps respond, we face the future with both caution and courage. The universe may still be silent, but we are no longer alone in listening. And perhaps, just perhaps, we are no longer alone at all. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.